We are just downstream of the main beaver dam, which is holding back an absolutely enormous volume of water.
So without the beaver dam in this area, what would this be like right now?
The satellite imagery returned from the Alberta wilderness didn't make sense. Analysts expected an undocumented geological formation, or perhaps a forgotten industrial relic swallowed by the brush. Instead, they found a leviathan, a structure so massive it altered the subarctic hydrology of Wood Buffalo National Park. It wasn't built by machines or man, but by an architect with orange teeth and a flat tail. Wait, what? This is the story of the 850-meter-long monument to nature's most persistent engineer, the beaver. The Goliath in the brush. The northern wilderness of Alberta is a place that does not like to be watched. It is a massive, lonely stretch of spruce trees and sinking mud, where the ground feels more like a wet sponge than a solid floor. For a long time, this specific corner of Wood Buffalo National Park was just a blank spot on the map, a quiet kingdom of wolves, bison, and biting flies. It is a land of brutal extremes. In the winter, the temperature drops so low that the trees literally crack open from the cold. In the summer, the sun hangs in the sky for nearly 20 hours, turning the ground into a soup of peat and mosquitoes. It is not a place where humans go for a stroll. It is a place where nature is the boss, and it likes to keep its secrets buried deep in the brush. But in 2007, that silence was interrupted by a satellite orbiting hundreds of miles above the clouds. An environmental researcher named John Thie was sitting in his office, scrolling through Google Earth images. He wasn't looking for a world record. He was looking for signs of melting permafrost, trying to track how climate change was eating away at the Canadian tundra. As he scanned the grainy green and brown patches of the park, he stopped. He zoomed in. He blinked, wiped his eyes, and zoomed in again. There, tucked away in a marshy basin near the Birch River, was something that shouldn't have been there. It looked like a giant, dark scar cutting through the bright green swamp. In the world of satellite photos, long, straight lines are almost always made by people. Nature usually works in curves, messy splashes, and jagged edges. If you see a perfectly straight line in the middle of a forest, you've usually found a road, a pipeline, or a fence. But there are no roads in this part of Wood Buffalo. There are no pipelines. There isn't even a hiking trail within 100 miles. This structure was huge, a massive dark ridge that measured 850 meters from end to end. To put that in perspective, if you stood it on its end, it would be taller than the Burj Khalifa, the tallest skyscraper on Earth. It was twice as long as the Hoover Dam. It was so big it could be seen from space, yet it had been sitting there in total secrecy for decades. Thie began to dig through historical archives to figure out how a project this big could have been missed. He pulled up old aerial photos from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and that's when the true scale of the story began to emerge. This wasn't a sudden anomaly, it was a slow-motion miracle. In the 70s, the photos showed just a few small, scattered piles of sticks in a marshy creek. By the early 90s, those individual piles had started to stretch out toward each other like hands reaching across the mud. By the time the satellite caught it in 2007, the Beavers had successfully joined these sections together to create a single massive, unbroken wall. They had terraformed 17 acres of forest into a private, watery kingdom. It was a humbling moment for the scientific world. We spend billions of dollars on high-tech cameras, orbital sensors, and deep space telescopes to keep an eye on every inch of our planet, only to find out that a group of rodents had been building the world's largest biological structure right under our noses for 40 years. They didn't have blueprints. They didn't have heavy machinery. They didn't have a government budget. They just had orange teeth and a relentless, stubborn need to stop the sound of running water. The most incredible part of the discovery was how well the forest protected its secret. Even after Thie published his findings and the news went viral, the dam remained a phantom. It wasn't like a museum where you could just buy a ticket and see it. It took another 3 years for a human being to actually set foot on it. The swamp around the dam acts like a natural moat. The mud is so deep it can pull the boots right off your feet, and the willow thickets are so dense you have to crawl through them on your hands and knees. When the first explorer, a man named Rob Mark, finally reached the site in 2010 after a grueling multi-day trek, he didn't find a pile of fresh wood. He found a mountain. The dam had been there so long that it had become part of the earth itself. It wasn't just sticks and mud anymore. Grass had grown over the top. Willow trees had sprouted from the walls, their roots reaching down to weave the structure together into something as strong as concrete. It looked less like a dam and more like a permanent geological ridge. The Beavers had effectively rewritten the map of Alberta. By stopping the flow of the creek, they had created a massive wetland that acted as a buffer against the forest fires that often roar through the north. They hadn't just built a home, they had built a sanctuary that protected their entire ecosystem. Standing on top of that wall, looking out over the 17-acre lake the Beavers had created, the realization hits you. We are not the only engineers on this planet. We are just the loudest ones. While we were busy building cities of glass and steel, these animals were quietly working in the dark, stick by stick, year after year, building a monument that would outlast most of our own roads. They were playing a long game that spanned generations, passing the job down from parents to kits until they had achieved something impossible. But how does an animal with no tools and no blueprints manage to outbuild the best engineers in the world? The architecture of obsession. To understand how a 60-pound rodent builds a monument visible from the moon, you have to stop thinking like a human and start thinking like a beaver. We build with blueprints, cranes, and committees. A beaver builds with a singular, near-manic obsession triggered by one specific sound, the sound of running water. To a beaver, the sound of a leak is an emergency. It is a biological alarm bell that won't stop ringing until the silence of a still pond is restored. In Wood Buffalo, that alarm bell has been ringing for over 40 years, driving a dynasty of engineers to create a masterpiece of primitive physics. It all starts with the teeth. A beaver's front teeth are not like ours. They are reinforced with iron, which gives them a distinct rusty orange color. They are self-sharpening. As the beaver chews, the softer dentin on the back wears away faster than the hard enamel on the front, creating a chisel-like edge that never goes dull. They can chew through a willow branch in seconds and a thick poplar tree in a few hours. But having the tools is only half the battle. The real magic is in the masonry. The beavers don't just toss sticks into the water and hope for the best. That would be a pile, not a dam. Instead, they follow a structural logic that would make a civil engineer nod in approval. They start by scouting the riverbed for anchor points, large rocks or heavy sunken logs that can act as a foundation. Once the anchor is set, they begin the framing process. They drive stout branches into the mud at an angle, slanting them upstream. This is a deliberate choice. By leaning the dam against the current, they use the weight of the oncoming water to actually push the structure down into the mud, making it tighter and stronger over time. Once the skeleton of the dam is in place, the plastering begins. This is the most labor-intensive part of the job. A beaver will dive to the bottom of the pond, scoop up an armful of thick, heavy river muck, and carry it against its chest while swimming back to the wall. They pack this mud into the gaps between the sticks, using their front paws to shove it deep into the cracks. They add stones, some weighing up to several pounds, to provide ballast. They weave in smaller twigs, aquatic plants, and even clumps of grass to create a fiber-reinforced composite that is remarkably similar to the way humans make adobe or reinforced concrete. As the dam grows taller, the water level behind it rises, creating a deep, still pond. This isn't just for a nice view. Beavers are clumsy on land. They are slow, heavy, and delicious to wolves. But in the water, they are torpedoes. By building a massive dam, they aren't just making a wall. They are expanding their safe zone. The deeper the water, the harder it is for a predator to reach their lodge. The wider the pond, the more trees they can reach by water, allowing them to swim right up to their food source rather than dragging heavy logs across the dangerous forest floor. The 850-meter structure in Wood Buffalo is a masterclass in hydrostatic pressure management. In a normal dam, the weight of the water pushes against the center, which is usually the weakest point. But these beavers built wings. By extending the dam hundreds of meters into the surrounding brush, they distributed the weight of the reservoir across a massive surface area. They also built primary and secondary dams. If you look at the satellite imagery, you can see smaller dams located just downstream from the main wall. These act as speed bumps, slowing down the water and creating back pressure that helps support the main structure. It is a sophisticated multi-stage filtration system built entirely out of mud and spit. The sheer volume of material in this structure is staggering. Thousands of tons of wood and earth have been moved, one armful at a time. If a human tried to do this by hand, it would take a small army and a decade of work. The beavers did it by simply never stopping. They work primarily at night, under the cover of the boreal darkness, guided by the sound of the water. If a single stick moves or a small trickle of water starts to hiss through a gap, the repair reflex kicks in. They don't need a foreman to tell them what to do. The physics of the river tells them where the dam is weak, and they respond with more mud and more sticks. This obsession is what turned a simple creek into a 17-acre lake. In the harsh environment of northern Alberta, this lake is a lifesaver. Because the water is so deep, it doesn't freeze all the way to the bottom in the winter, allowing the beavers to swim under the ice to reach their food caches. The dam also acts as a giant sponge for the ecosystem. During the spring melt, it catches the rushing floodwaters and holds them, preventing the forest downstream from being washed away. During the dry summer months, it slowly releases that water, keeping the surrounding forest green and lush, while other areas turn to tinder. The result is a structure that is more than just a barrier. It is a living, breathing machine that regulates the temperature and moisture of the entire valley. It is a fortress that grows stronger every time the wind blows or the rain falls. Most human structures begin to fall apart the moment we finish building them. We spend billions on maintenance just to keep our bridges from rusting away. But the beaver dam is different. Because it is made of living willow and nutrient-rich mud, it heals itself. It grows, it adapts. It is a piece of technology that is perfectly in sync with the world around it. But even the greatest structure needs a leader, and in Wood Buffalo, the leadership didn't come from one individual, but from a family line that refused to leave. The Beaver Dynasty. To look at a wall of sticks nearly a kilometer long is to look at a timeline of a family. In the human world, we are used to projects that have a start date and an end date. We hire a contractor, the work gets done, and the crew leaves. But for the Beavers of Wood Buffalo, there is no finished. There is only the continuation. This massive dam is not the work of a single super beaver or a one-time genius. It is the result of a 40-year relay race where the baton was a mouthful of mud and the track was a swampy creek in the middle of nowhere. Most beaver colonies are small, temporary operations. A young pair of beavers will find a stream, build a modest dam, raise a few kits, and eventually move on when the local food supply runs out. But Wood Buffalo is different. Here, the founding fathers of this colony hit the ecological jackpot in the mid-70s. They found a spot where the water was slow and the willow trees were endless. Because the environment was so perfect, the usual rules of beaver migration didn't apply. Instead of leaving, the children stayed, and then the grandchildren stayed. This created what scientists call a dynastic colony. In most places, when a beaver reaches 2 years old, it is kicked out of the lodge to find its own territory. It's a dangerous time. Most of these teenagers end up as dinner for a wolf or a lynx before they ever fell their first tree. But in the safety of this mega dam, the survival rate skyrocketed. The colony grew larger than anyone thought possible. Instead of one family of 5 or 6, researchers suspect this site has hosted multiple families working in a strange, unspoken cooperation. They aren't just roommates. They are a multi-generational construction firm. This intergenerational handoff is visible in the very fabric of the dam. If you were to cut a cross-section through the 850-meter wall, you would be looking at a history book. The bottom layers are ancient, black with age and compressed into a peat-like substance by the sheer weight of the water. These are the ancestor logs placed there during the Nixon administration. On top of those are the layers from the 90s, woven through with the roots of bushes that have had decades to grow. And at the very top, you find the fresh work, bright, peeled willow sticks that still smell like sap, placed there just last night by a beaver whose great-great-grandparents started the job. The beavers pass down more than just a home. They pass down the territory memory. They know exactly where the weak points in the landscape are. They know which trickles of water need to be blocked to keep the pond deep. This collective knowledge allowed them to expand the dam's wings further and further into the forest. Each generation didn't have to start from scratch. They simply maintained the old wall and added 10 feet to the end of it. Over 40 years, those 10-foot additions turned a small pond into a landscape-altering lake. There is something haunting about the idea of this silent, rhythmic labor happening in the dark, year after year, while the human world changed outside. While the internet was invented, while wars were fought, and while cities rose and fell, these rodents were focused on a single task. They didn't know they were breaking a world record. They didn't know they were being watched from space. They were simply honoring the work of their parents by making the wall a little bit longer, a little bit higher, and a little bit tighter. This dynasty also changed the rules of the forest. Usually, a beaver dam is a temporary glitch in the river. Eventually, it breaks, the water rushes out, and the land returns to being a meadow. But this dam has reached a point of critical mass. It is now so thick and so overgrown with trees that it would likely survive even if the beavers left tomorrow. They have successfully forced the geography of Alberta to accept their presence. They didn't just build a structure, they founded a kingdom that has outlasted many human governments. As the colony grew and the dam stretched toward the kilometer mark, it began to attract attention from the one predator that can go where even wolves fear to tread: the ghost in the machine. For 3 years after the dam was spotted from space, it remained a phantom. It was a collection of pixels on a screen, a data point in a research paper, but it wasn't yet real to the human senses. No one had heard the water rushing over its spillways or smelled the damp rot of its ancient mud. The reason was simple. The dam was located in a place that seemed designed to keep humans out. It sat in the heart of a no-man's land, where the map of Alberta stops being a grid of roads and starts being a chaotic maze of emerald green and murky brown. In 2010, an explorer named Rob Mark decided it was time to change that. He didn't have a helicopter or a government budget. He just had a backpack, a GPS, and a stubborn desire to see the impossible with his own eyes. The journey he described was less of a hike and more of a battle against the earth itself. In this part of Wood Buffalo, there is no such thing as a dry foot. The ground is a layer of moss floating over several feet of black, freezing water. If you step in the wrong place, you don't just trip, you sink to your waist. The forest here is a black spruce thicket, a dense, tangled mess of spindly trees that grow so close together you often have to crawl on your stomach to move forward. The mosquitoes and blackflies arrive in clouds so thick they can drive a person to the edge of madness. For days, Mark pushed through this green wall, guided only by the coordinates on his screen. The irony was thick. He was using multi-billion-dollar satellite technology to find a pile of sticks built by an animal that doesn't even have a thumb. When he finally broke through the last line of trees, the forest opened up into a massive, shimmering lake. And there it was. The dam didn't look like something an animal had made. It looked like a geological ridge, a natural boundary that had been there since the beginning of time. It was a massive, soggy rampart draped in emerald moss and tall grasses. Willow trees, some over 10 feet tall, were growing straight out of the top of the dam, their roots acting like living rebar to hold the mud together. Standing on top of it, the scale of the dynasty finally became clear. This wasn't just a wall, it was a bridge. It was wide enough to walk on comfortably, an elevated highway through the swamp. To the left, the water was high, still, and deep, a 17-acre reservoir that reflected the big Canadian sky like a giant mirror. To the right, the land dropped away into the old creek bed, a tangle of brush and trickling water. The beavers had successfully tilted the landscape, holding back millions of gallons of water with nothing but the strength of their weaving. There was a strange, eerie silence at the site. Even though the beavers were nearby, they were hidden in their lodges, massive domes of wood that looked like floating islands in the middle of the lake. The dam felt like an abandoned city, yet the fresh mud and the smell of peeled bark told a different story. The builders were there, watching from the safety of the dark water, waiting for the human intruder to leave so they could get back to work. Mark was the first human to ever stand on this monument, but he was clearly not the owner of it. The expedition proved that the satellite hadn't lied. If anything, the satellite had understated the achievement. Up close, you could see the fine details, the way the beavers had used larger logs at the base to fight the current, and how they had created emergency spillways to let water out during heavy rains so the main wall wouldn't burst. It was a masterpiece of accidental engineering. It was a structure that functioned perfectly, without a single nail, a single bag of concrete, or a single human hand. But the most haunting realization of the trip wasn't the size of the dam. It was the fact that the dam was still moving. It was expanding. Even as Mark stood there, the beavers were likely planning the next extension, pushing their empire further into the trees. What began as a small family project had turned into a force of nature that was now rewriting the rules of the entire ecosystem. The Earth Shapers. While we tend to look at the Wood Buffalo Dam as a record-breaking curiosity, for the rest of the forest, this structure is a literal lifesaver. Scientists call beavers keystone species, but that term feels too small for what is happening in this corner of Alberta. A keystone holds up an arch. These beavers are holding up an entire world. By building this 850-meter wall, they haven't just created a pond. They have engineered a massive permanent wetland that acts as a biological shield against the greatest threats to the boreal forest. The most immediate impact is on fire. The northern woods are a tinderbox. Every summer, lightning strikes ignite massive wildfires that can wipe out thousands of acres in a single afternoon. These fires move like freight trains, consuming everything in their path except for the beaver ponds. From the air, firefighters often see a scorched, blackened landscape with a single vibrant green circle in the middle. That circle is the beaver oasis. The millions of gallons of water held back by the Wood Buffalo Dam soak into the surrounding soil, keeping the plants so hydrated they simply refuse to burn. The dam is a natural firebreak that protects the ancient spruce trees from the flames. Then there is the issue of water quality. The boreal forest is often called the lungs of the planet, but the wetlands are its kidneys. As the creek water hits the massive beaver wall, it slows down. This pause allows the sediment, pollutants, and heavy metals to sink to the bottom of the pond, where they are trapped in the mud. By the time the water trickles out the other side of the dam, it is cleaner than it was when it arrived. The beavers are essentially running a free 24-hour water treatment plant that services the entire downstream ecosystem. But the most dramatic change is in the local neighborhood. Before the dam was built, this was a simple creek with a limited amount of life. Now, it is a bustling metropolis. The 17-acre lake has become a magnet for species that would otherwise struggle to survive in this harsh terrain. Waterfowl like ducks and geese use the pond as a safe landing strip during their long migrations. Muskrats move into the basements of the beaver lodges, living in a strange cross-species harmony. Even the moose come here to feed on the nutrient-rich aquatic plants that only grow in the still deep water of a beaver pond. The beavers have also created a carbon sink. In a normal forest, dead trees rot on the ground and release their carbon back into the atmosphere. But when a beaver floods an area, those trees are submerged in water. This prevents them from rotting quickly, locking the carbon away in the muck for centuries. In an age of climate change, these rodents are doing more for the planet's atmosphere than many of our own carbon capture technologies. They are burying the forest's waste and turning it into a foundation for new life. What is happening in Wood Buffalo is a reminder that the wild is not a static place. It is constantly being shaped, molded, and repaired by the creatures that live there. The beavers didn't set out to save the forest or clean the water. They were just trying to build a safe place to raise their kids. But in the process of looking after themselves, they became the ultimate guardians of the land. They proved that the most effective way to heal an ecosystem isn't to manage it from a boardroom, but to let the local architects get back to work. However, as the planet continues to warm, the work of these Earth Shapers is entering a new, more aggressive phase. The silent future. The story of the Wood Buffalo Dam isn't a history lesson. It is a breaking news report. Most human monuments are static, beginning a slow crawl toward decay the moment they are finished. But this dam is a living thing. It is still breathing and growing. Since 2007, satellite updates show the beavers are building new sections that could soon push the structure past a full kilometer in length. This expansion comes at a critical time. As the climate warms, the beaver invasion is moving north, acting as a stabilizer and a wet anchor that holds the landscape together against the rising heat. While we look to space for answers, some of the most important technology on Earth is being built with mud and wood. This monument teaches us humility. We assume that if something massive is happening, humans must be behind it. But in the silent heart of the Canadian North, a family of rodents has spent 40 years proving us wrong. They built a structure visible from the stars without a single ego or a blueprint. It is a promise that nature will always find a way to rebuild itself, one branch at a time. The Wood Buffalo Dam is a living monument to nature's persistence. While we build with steel and ego, these beavers build with mud and time. Visible from space, yet hidden by the forest, it reminds us that the world's greatest architects don't need blueprints. They just need the will to survive. If you enjoyed this deep dive into nature's greatest engineers, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of the wild.